All right, my guest today, Mr. Brad Page, who I haven't talked to in a long time because I'm a bad friend and I'm bad at being a
Oh,
friend. How's it going, buddy?
I am just as guilty as you. But it's great to talk to you again. It's been a while,
Yeah, well,
been like a year at least.
us introverts just hiding in our corners, refusing to talk to people.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. So, how goes the "I'm in love with that song" podcast? I just skimmed the website, so still going strong.
Yeah, we're churning out episodes regularly, twice a month. Been mixing it up a little bit, doing a few different approaches to it, but it's been going great. It's been a ton of fun to do. It's certainly kept me busy during these pandemic quarantine times. It's always good to have something to keep yourself busy so you don't go nuts.
Yeah, for my listeners who might not be familiar, you basically do the same thing I do, but a better job with it, where
Well, thanks.
you're breaking down songs that you know, but me, I'm doing it completely lazy and unscripted, picking it up through a random number generator. But you're like writing a script and doing editing and having a microphone that isn't terrible. So
Yeah,
you're doing things
it's
the proper way.
I do put a lot of research into it, but it starts from the idea of that's a great song. I want to know more about it. So I don't come into the episodes knowing everything. It's basically what can I find out about this song? Why does it work so well? And everything from the history to the performances to the production techniques. We just kind of get into all of it, but it's basically me just learning and trying to share that. So, I don't come into it as an expert. I come into each song as just as a listener trying to figure out why do I like this song so much? Why does it work?
As opposed to what do you think about the Rick Beato way he does things? Because I prefer your method much more to his, where he's just like, here's the chord progression and here's the gear that was used. Isn't that cool? Without describing why said gear being used and why said chord progression is a good thing.
Well, I mean, people love his show. Um, and I actually don't really watch it. I don't watch it. There's been a few episodes that I've watched, but for the most part, I don't watch it because I don't want it to influence my show. I want to do my thing and let him do his thing. So, but he does focus, he's more technical than I am. I never talk about, G major seventh chords or things like that. I don't think that the average listener knows or cares about that. It's more about the interesting story about how the song was created and how the different pieces fall together, but it's not, you don't have to be a musician to listen to the show. I always try to think of just what would the average listener find interesting, not what would a hardcore musician find interesting about it. And I hope that makes the show broad enough that it's interesting to more than just total music theory nerds.
Yeah, I feel like I said, I prefer your approach to this. I think there's a way to do both. Like he can say, like, "Hey, this chord here gives you this feeling of triumphant sadness. That's why that's a clever songwriting technique." And I always just get so frustrated watching this video because it's all just the technical stuff. Versus yours is more like the emotion, the journey of the writer, the production techniques that you don't necessarily need to be a trained musician to pick up on. You just have to have a trained ear listening to music. So basically, like my audience would love you because I'm just like bullshitting Thin Lizzy songs once a week, but you're like actually doing the proper dissection of stuff they'd appreciate.
Well, thanks. But yeah, again, it's to me all the the mathematics that go into chord progressions don't mean anything if the end product doesn't connect with you emotionally in some way. And to me, that's what's important. There's only so many chords, and they can only be put together in so many ways that they actually sound good. It's not infinite. And so basically any song you can think of, there's other songs that use those exact same chord progressions or whatever, but it's what makes that particular song better than the 100 other songs that share that same chord progression. There's some other mojo in there besides just the pure math of,
One, four, five.
circle of fifths and all of that
Right.
stuff that you have to know if you're going to want to be really good at it in terms of being a songwriter or being a studio musician. But again, I don't think any of that matters if it doesn't ultimately connect with people emotionally.
So I have a curiosity question because you have good taste in music and we align on a lot of different things. And I know you're a massive Todd Rundgren fan,
Yep.
and I know you don't like Jim Steinman. But what are your thoughts on the Bat Out of Hell album? Because that's generally considered to be one of Rundgren's better productions. You know, it's a top 10 selling album of all time. Like, where does that sit with you, like, as a Rundgren fan? Like, how do you process that album?
Well, uh, it's ultimately the thing with Steinman that I have a hard time buying into is um I'm not a big fan of the lyrics and the bombast dips a little too much into musical theater for me, which I'm not a humongous fan of. Like I love to go see musicals on if I'm going to go see something on Broadway, it would always be a musical because to me that takes to me dramas are better on film or on TV. Uh, but musicals you can't beat a live musical. It's like a concert in a way. But I would never put on the soundtrack to a musical and just listen to it without the other part of the experience, the visual aspect of it. So, anyways, this is a long answer, but um, so those just compositionally, that's I mean, I don't hate Jim Steinman. I just like to poke you about Jim Steinman.
I know, but but
But
since that's so
it just
universally
it
loved,
doesn't.
that's why I was wondering your take on it.
Yeah, it that piece of it doesn't really connect with me all that much. The thing about Bad Out of Hell, as a production work, just purely as a production, the technical aspect of it. I mean, the record sounds great. Um, you can't take that away, and that was all Todd. And a certain amount of the vision. I mean, obviously Steinman is 90% of the vision there. But what Todd heard in that music was a parody of Bruce Springsteen. That's how he heard it. And it was his idea to get the guys from Springsteen's band to play on it. And that 10% that he brought to it musically, plus his production work, I think is what makes that record so unique. And everything that came after that is kind of echoes of that record. All the other Meatloaf record, the Bad for Good record, they're all in the same. Once you've heard Bad Out of Hell, you know what those other records basically are going to sound like.
I think that's fair.
But
I would say the first one definitely has more of Todd's influence than the rest. I think they head in a
sure,
more operatic direction versus you really get that classic, 70s rock and roll vibe from Todd's particular vision for the album.
right. I mean, he plays guitar all over that record. So he's a big part of that. But so I appreciate it in terms of the technical aspects of it, what it took to put it together, the sound of the record. I mean, it's just a great sounding record. But just musically, it's not my favorite thing.
No, I mean I completely understood. It's very interesting because knowing you're such a huge Todd Rundgren fan, like knowing your demographic and just like knowing like you're not into Paradise by the Dashboard Lights is it's just like an interesting thing where like it'd be like if you looked at all of my tastes and it's like, oh, but he doesn't like Motley Crue and loves every other hair metal band. Like it'd just like be this weird anomaly. Although ironically, Most of Motley Crue's popular stuff I don't like. So I understand that where it's just like this one thing like you'd think based upon most check boxes you'd like it, but there's enough variances that lead you to being in the minority on that. So I relate to that in a way.
Well, yeah, and ultimately you like what you like, and it's difficult to sometimes defend what you like or defend what you don't like, because it's just ultimately it's a chocolate or vanilla thing. There's nothing wrong with either flavor, but some people just way prefer one more than the other, and it's you can't quantify that in any measurable way. Um, but I'm a huge prog rock fan, and there's a lot of that in Steinman, so you think that would appeal to me, but it just some of it just is on the other side of the line from what I generally like. It's just a little too gimmicky for me. If
Says the
Paradise
Kiss
by
fan.
Dashboard Light, right? So there you go. Right? I mean, what can I tell you? Um, but it is what it is, as they say. I hate that expression, but it's ultimately it just doesn't ring my bell.
No, I mean I get. It. I mean I listen to musical soundtracks all the time, and I'm the type of guy where like if I see a new musical is free on YouTube Movies, I'm like, ooh, I should watch that because it's free to watch. That's awesome. So I'm a big musical guy. Like I made a list, and I was planning on doing it for the channel at some point of like musicals I've seen, and I think I'm at like 150 something. Um, so that's why it made sense. Like, oh, guy who likes classic rock and musicals probably thinks Steinman is cool. Guy who doesn't like musicals that much probably isn't going to be warming up to the 8-minute Jim Steinman songs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with minute songs, but it's just
It's eight
it's a
minute
little
Steinman songs is where the issue
right. It's
is.
exactly, yeah, and like I said, I mean, there's musicals that I love too. Fiddler on the Roof is just a classic. I never get tired of that.
And
But
see, that's one I
again,
haven't seen. That's on my list to
oh,
see.
you should see it. It's really good. The film is really pretty good too. Um, but it again, I wouldn't ever put that on just to listen to for entertainment. But if it's on TV, I'll stop and watch it.
So I remember a while back we were talking about doing just a general podcast talking about Kiss. Do you have anything about Kiss you want to talk about?
I'm a little kissed out at this point. I actually just recorded. I've been doing a series within the series of the podcast called "The Albums That Made Us," where I have a guest come on and we talk about a record that had a huge impact in their life, and I bring one of my impactful records to the table. And I just finished one with Chris Sinzak about
Kiss.
Kiss.
Was it
Oh
Rock and Roll Over?
no, he brought Crazy Nights, and
Ah, yes.
I brought Alive, and we talked about those records
Uh,
we talked for probably 2 hours. The podcast will be about 40 minutes when it's all edited down. But so anyway, I'm about all kissed out at this point. But yeah, well, we were going to talk when the end of the road was announced and the tour started, and it was kind of going to be two generations of Kiss fans looking at the end of the road. That was kind of my idea. And we sort of did it, and then I, I screwed up the recording, so it never
yeah,
happened.
now I remember.
No
We
one
had
ever
to
got to hear it, but
we recorded that, and then the recording got corrupted. I remember that now because like, didn't
uh,
we mean to do that? And yeah, I remember.
yeah, yeah. And you sent me your audio file, but it was only your end of the conversation, and my whole thing was corrupted, and I couldn't use it. So unfortunately, but yeah, we did have a good conversation of that. I mean, we can sort of talk about that if you want.
I mean, I'm just going with the flow. I was just trying to not make. I was worried it was like one of those lingering promises that you like we left out there that we never did. Like there's a buddy of mine. I said, we're gonna write a song together, and then we just haven't written a song together, and just like one of those things that just lingers out there, and you want resolution to. But yeah, knowing that like we resolved it, It's just no one heard it. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Right.
I mean, I've talked about Kiss enough in my lifetime. We did every album on the Lipstick panel, and
Yes,
then
you
did
did.
did an 8 parts, or was it 12 parts? I don't even know how many parts of just like ranking the albums after going through every album.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, I've talked about Kiss enough for one lifetime, but I do find it hilarious that like Chris brought Crazy Nights and you brought Alive. That is a pairing of records right there.
Yeah, well, it's kind of wherever you come in, right? And I just happened to come in at that time. The and we talked about this on the podcast, but uh, my when I was a preteen, I didn't care about music at all. I didn't have any older brother or sisters in the house to be bringing music in. My parents were of the Lawrence Welk generation, which is enough to make anyone hate music. And the only thing I really knew about guitars was the girls who would bring in their acoustic guitars to fourth grade class and play like Day by Day and Kumbaya, and I didn't want to have anything to do with that. I was into comic books. That meant the world to me when I was at that age. And then I discovered Kiss, and there's no better band to transition from comic books into rock and roll than Kiss, right?
Right?
So that was my entry point. And the first sort of rock album that I owned was actually the Beach Boys Christmas album, which shows you what a nerd I was. But the second album I bought was Rock and Roll Over.
Okay, so there you go. You had one that zero street cred, one a lot street cred, and
Right.
I don't remember if you had told me the story before because actually we have sort of similar stories in that I wasn't into music at all as a preteen. I thought music was lame because I grew up in the 90s and just heard what was on the radio, assumed that was all the music that exists. And I'm just like, I guess music is just this shitty thing that some people like. And then I went to a Kiss concert. I was like, whoa, turns out music is actually pretty cool. But, I was into comics and probably video games and books more than comic books. Uh, I just because I just like the narratives better. But
Mhm.
it's sort of that same transition of just discovering Kiss, thinking they were cool. Although my first album had more street cred than yours slightly because it was Queen Greatest Hits 3 because I just thought Princes of the Universe was a badass song and I bought the only CD in the store that had that song on it.
Well, you can't go wrong with Queen. I mean, come on. They were amongst the first uh, handful of records I owned. I don't. You may be too young to remember this, but back in the olden days, they used to have these record clubs. Do you know about record clubs?
I'm familiar where it's like, "Oh man, you get all these for $1 or whatever it
Right. There
was."
would
And
be, yeah, there'd be an ad in the back of a magazine or somewhere in a magazine where it would be, send in $1, sometimes even a penny. Send in a penny, and we'll send you 10 albums or cassettes or whatever, 8 tracks, because I still made 8 tracks back then. And you have to commit to buying like 3 albums at their regular price over the course of a year. And so many people of my generation, that's how we built our record collections. Is we would sign up, get our 10 free records, immediately buy the 3 we needed to commit uh, uh, to meet our obligation. Then we would cancel our membership, and like a month later sign up again and do it all over again. And so it's a very easy way to very quickly amass a ton of records. But Queen Day at the Races was in there amongst maybe my first 10 albums that I owned. Actually, I got that one on cassette because I didn't have a record player. I had one of those cheapo portable cassette players with one speaker, one mono speaker in it. It sounded terrible, but you know, you got to start somewhere.
yep, yeah, absolutely. I mean, in some ways I feel like my generation like in some ways I'm like, oh man, I feel robbed because I couldn't have joined one of those record clubs. But on the other hand, I'm the streaming generation, so like I turned out fine with my
Yeah, well, you
access
don't
to
need that,
music. Yeah.
right? Yeah. The one thing that you miss is the experience of the record cover, which is a legit art form in and of itself.
Oh yes, absolutely. And I
and
I
it's
bought
a shake.
albums based on album cover alone. Like
Sure.
Star Castle. I looked
Yep.
at the Star Castle debut album. Like I have not heard a single note of this band, but I know exactly what they sound like, and I bought it,
Right.
and they sounded exactly like you'd
Right.
think based upon that album cover. It was perfect.
Yeah, and think about that. It's the thing about the record covers is, to me, it is the perfect alignment or meeting of a purely commercial product. It's a piece of art that's designed to sell something. So it's a commercial piece of artwork. And yet there's so many brilliant, just pure artistic pieces of work that were turned into album covers. There's just so many great covers out there, and you think about what it takes to do exactly what you said, to make a piece of art that's going to exactly represent what that record's going to sound like. I mean, as an artist, I don't even know where you start to do that. I don't have any art skills at all in that sense, and that boggles my mind that somebody could, probably the band plays a little bit of the song, and the artist says, "Okay, I got it," and goes away and creates this beautiful piece of work. Uh, it's amazing to me
Yeah,
how
I
you
mean,
can visually represent what a sound is going to a song is going to sound like in a visual representation like that. The greatest covers all do that, and sometimes it's photography, and sometimes it's artwork, and sometimes it's just the logo and almost.
that's our first album. It's just black with that bright pink logo, which immediately lets you know, okay, this is going to be some heavy glam. You just sort of know immediately based upon that first album cover, and you know, both album covers were designed by me more or less, even if not all the specific art was created by me. It was still designed. The second album cover maybe was less successful in conveying what was in the album, which might explain the sales. Uh, do you have commercially released music like available on the streaming services, and that you did like collaborate with an album cover for?
I released, so the band I was in called 10 Story Love in like 1999. We released a CD that I believe you can find it on Spotify if you search for 10 Story Love. There's a song by the Stone Roses called 10 Story Love. So that'll be the first thing you find.
Hmm.
But if you look for a band called 10 Story Love, you'll probably find our stuff. It's kind of power poppy. One of the guys in the band designed the album cover. I tossed in a few ideas, but it was largely his project. But that's the extent of my commercially released experience.
Well, that wasn't a bad era for power pop. I mean, that was still like power pop is one of those genres that like never completely goes out of vogue. It always sort of stays at like the same ish level of popularity.
Well, power pop never gets hugely popular. I guess to me the Beatles kind of created power pop, so it's hard to find a band more popular than the Beatles. But kind of once you get past that, maybe the Knack
You could say
might have
Cheap
been.
Trick was
Yeah,
but
that's true.
but
Yeah,
but
Cheap Trick
it feels
is
like
is
every
is
power pop band is like a flash in the pan. Like they have like their really huge like heyday for like a couple years, and then maybe a couple hits later down the line. But like they don't necessarily. Well, I mean, I guess Cheap Trick you would say is a legendary act, but like most of them, like like I said, flash in the pan, like Super Drag, Fountains of Wayne. Even though Adam Schlesinger had a great career, Click Five, it's like they have their hit, and then it's like they become a cult band for in pretty much all of them.
you're exactly right, and they come along one at a time. Like you look at the rise of hip hop or the rise of hair metal in the 80s or new wave at the same time, and it's a musical wave that carries a whole bunch of bands into public consciousness, but there's never been a big wave of power pop. There's been plenty of power pop bands out there bubbling under the surface, but one will raise their head like Cheap Trick and have some success, and Fountains of Wayne in the late '90s or whatever. That was the late '90s, right?
I think
Uh,
so.
but it's sort of a one and done kind of thing. There's no long tail, so to speak, to that. It it's but in a way, I think that sort of preserves the music in a way that it doesn't become uh, it doesn't turn into like how hair metal all of a sudden one day just Nirvana came and flushed it all down the toilet.
Yeah, that's true. It all like because power pop is always amongst like my music nerd friends. Pretty much everyone respects power pop and thinks it's cool, and like the cool status never goes up or down. It's always just like hell yeah, power pop is cool, and it never like I said, it's never really gone out of fashion, and it seems to be
Right, because it's never really been in fashion, not the way the big waves come.
right. Well, it's always been just like it just like it brings out a very specific niche audience and people who can like appreciate pop craft but also appreciate it from a rock band, and so people who are simultaneously like able to appreciate both those things because like you have your prog fans and a lot of them are all just about like how well can you play your instrument, bro, that's the only thing I care about. But like power pop, it brings out just like a very intellectual kind of listener with like a really like they tend to have like a broader palette musically. The power pop fans have noticed.
That's probably true, and I also think that it's the the problem, if you want to call it a problem. I'm not convinced it is a problem, but in terms of the commercially, I think what makes it a problem is that a it doesn't have a defined look the way that it was very easy to catch the new wave look or the heavy metal look. There isn't really like a look for
Suits
a power pop band. Yeah, but that's the
for a lot
the
of
skinny
them.
tie thing, but the new wave had the skinny tie thing too. So it doesn't have a defined look that if you want to if it's I mean and that's always part of a popular trend is it's not just the music. You start to dress like that. You do your hair the way your favorite heavy metal bands had their hair, or your favorite new wave bands had their hair. You got the Flock of Seagulls do because you just think that's cool, or you wear the fluorescent colors the way the new wave bands do, or the hip hop thing. There's a look to that, and power pop has never really had that, and power pop does not like prog, it doesn't focus on musicianship. And generally, the songs are short, they're tight, they don't have extended solos or weird time signatures. So you don't have that technical thing to grab onto. So it's sort of it's in a way it's neither fish nor fowl, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
It's
it's the genre
it,
for songwriters and people
right.
who don't need everything to be Bob Dylan acoustic singer songwriter Joni Mitchell kind of stuff. It's like hey, popcraft is cool too. Popcraft is
Right.
actually very impressive.
Right. And I just think for a lot of people it's they want it easy. They want it easily identifiable, for the mass audience, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and sometimes power pop is, I guess, too subtle.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate because I think that's a very underrated genre of music and its longevity through the years. The fact that like in the midst of grunge, you still had like the occasional power pop hit, I think just goes to show you like the strength of the genre even against trends.
Right. Yeah. It's a little bit challenging now because just in terms of pop radio, the guitar is such a minor thing these days, and power pop it's guitar music.
Yeah, it is guitar music. You know, honestly, I don't think it's necessarily such a bad thing that the guitar isn't the primary instrument. anymore in the sense that like I'm looking at grunge bands and how the guitar was the primary instrument of those songs sucked, and I'm listening to K-pop, and K-pop is not the guitar is not primary, but man, those songs are so much catchier. So I'm like, you know what? I'm fine with this. I'll take
Yeah, I
BTS
get
over
that.
Nirvana.
I get that. I I was not a big the 80s was for me the 80s was largely a musical wasteland because I'm not a big fan of new wave and I'm not a big fan of hair metal. And that's what was capturing all of the
And
attention.
Total Eclipse of the Heart.
Right. And so when Nirvana came, the grunge thing came and kind of swept a lot of that stuff away. I wasn't heartbroken about it. I liked that grunge brought that sort of amorphous sense of authenticity, whatever that means in a rock and roll context. That's a loaded word, authenticity.
Yeah,
But you did get the feeling that there was something about grunge that there was some, and of course that got corrupted too. Not long as soon as record companies get their fingers into it,
yeah.
authenticity.
I think that's just
But there
history
was,
being written by the winners type thing. As someone who's like
yeah,
met a bunch of those hair band guys, I just think that's history being written by the winners of the grunge bands being more authentic. I think the authenticity level is at worst the same, in my opinion.
well, yes, and uh, ultimately, yes, I think that's true with any because rock and roll is commercial. It's music for the masses, and that's what makes it great. But it also makes it pretty vulnerable to being commercially manipulated. But I I think there was a lot of that. I mean, all you have to do is watch like the decline of Western civilization to see a lot of these bands just they just wanted to be famous
I mean, doesn't
and they
every
wanted
band
money and they
want
wanted
that?
the girls. I'm not sure that was Pearl Jam's goal or that was Nirvana's goal to be famous. I think they wanted to be good and they wanted to be respected, but I don't think they didn't do it for the chicks. You know what I mean? It- then of course everyone jumped on the bandwagon, but that initial wave of grunge, all I'm saying is that I respected that. I preferred that over the overly cynical commercial Sunset Strip stuff. But the problem with grunge is, I think, like you said, is that most of the bands they didn't have songs, they didn't have hooks, they just had a lot of angst and some rage and a lot of really loud guitars, which is cool, but you got to have songs. You got to have, I want hooks.
Yeah,
And
I,
that's what I love about power pop.
which is
And
totally not cynical and desiring success. So what makes power pop more like sincere than like a hair metal band? Because all power pop songs are pretty much about just like I want girls to like me. So what is the difference between the
yeah, well,
sincerity
my
of
least
that
favorite,
and the
and
sincerity of hair metal?
generally my least favorite thing about power pops is the lyrics. I don't think that a lot of power pop bands stretch enough. It can be done. Fountains of Wayne had tons of smart songs. Um, and you can still write songs about girls and they can still be smart. They can be
Yes,
better than, just, I don't know, cheesy lyrics.
Love Gun. They can be better than Love Gun.
But what, what, to me, the magic of power pop is just those jangly chords and the harmonies
Hmm.
and the melodies. And
The
that's
hooks.
super strong. That overrides the fact that, okay, so the lyrics are cliched. Um, but but damn, if that's not a catchy melody, if that song's not in my head the rest of the week, you know what I mean? That that's what I love. And when you can put the two together and have a really smart song with a great hook and great lyrics, that's the ultimate achievement to me. That's the magic.
And I think there's also with power pop, there's almost a joy to the cliches because I think
Yes. There's a celebration of the
Yeah,
cliches, but I mean, you can say that about some hair metal too. But that was all part of the power pop thing. Was um, much like early punk and just sort of stripping things down to the basics. They power pop was certainly more melodic than the original punk, but it was the idea of like just 3 minute songs about girls and love and uh, you know without trying to write yes lyrics.
yeah, I agree with that. And I think there's something about just like the pure like joy that it brings, just like on a
Mhm.
visceral like soul level, where you know like music that just like brightens your entire body and just makes you feel like there's a light within you. And power pop does that. Like there's
Absolutely.
there's few things that will make a human being as happy as hearing I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles. Like people
Right.
can they can talk shit and say, "Oh, early Beatles isn't that good." And I'm really into the harder stuff like Come Together. But when you're by yourself and I Want to Hold Your Hand comes on, it just lights a fire in your soul that cannot be described.
All those early songs are just, yeah, they are filled with joy, is a perfect word for it. And that's what makes great old R&B songs, Stax record stuff, Sam and Dave and Wilson Pickett and that stuff. It's music that just makes you feel great. And what's not to love about that? Who doesn't want to feel great? Come on.
A lot of metal kids don't want to feel great. They're like, this isn't heavy, bro. What, you're going to listen to songs about girls? You should listen to songs about war and stuff. And not that there's not great songs about war, like the Edwin Starr song immediately comes to mind. So it's not that, like, you can't write about more serious subject matter, but, like, what's wrong with listening to music and just feeling happy? Is what I don't understand.
I no, I totally agree, and that doesn't mean that there isn't a place and that you can't find something in darker music. It's sometimes you need that too, but you need both.
Yeah.
It can't be sunny day every day, but it can't be dark clouds, misery every day either. Because either you're deluding yourself or you're dragging yourself down. If that's all you're focusing on, you gotta, you know, you can't eat the same thing every day. You got to mix it up, right? You got to have
Oh, yeah.
variety.
They're like the dudes who like listen to like only like the heaviest black metal, and that's like the only stuff they listen to. Like I can't understand that in
Yeah,
my
I can't
brain.
either.
Like because there's not even like the melody to latch onto, and it's something I discuss with a lot of like metal friends and a lot of people my age. Like they, my taste is as a lot of my peers become older, they're starting to go back and appreciate older music. But like my generation, like they are, they were spoon-fed grunge and like the heaviest metal, and I just don't understand the like generation relating to that like on any kind of melodic level. Like it's all rhythmic, and so I can't resonate with it in any way.
Yeah, I hear you. I
Uh,
agree.
Old man Greg.
Yeah, yeah. Well, join the party. You skipped a couple of generations, I think. But yeah, and you and I have talked about this before, I think, on some other episodes we've done. But it's a pet peeve of mine uh, that bands and artists put themselves into tinier and tinier slices of the pie. Whereas to me, the great bands, whether it's the Beatles or Queen or the Who or uh, who were we just talking about? Somebody we were just talking about. It'll come to me. But these bands, Thin Lizzy is one that when you listen to an album, there's heavy stuff, there's poppy stuff, there's ballads, there's they were unafraid to do anything. And nobody at the time would say, Thin Lizzy, that's they're not metal. That's a ballad. That's for pussies.
I mean,
Like you
people
just,
did bitch about Beth.
yeah, but it sold millions of records, and you know, so there. Queen. would do Lazing on a Sunday Afternoon as Death on Two Legs, two total extremes, but they were fearless doing that. And I always feel like a lot of bands today, frankly, they would be afraid to have that much variety in their material because they'd be afraid of what their fans might think they're wimpy. And like, screw that. Just do. I mean, if all you want to do is death metal, fine. But to me, it's like eating the same meal every day. Like, I love ice cream, but even I don't want to eat just chocolate ice cream day
Right.
after day after day. Like you got to mix up your flavors. I just feel like those records would take you on a musical journey because there would be so much variety on all. To me, all the great records are like that. The great albums, whether again it's Queen or Beatles or whoever, you name it. There's tons of them out there, and it's not just that generation or that era. One of my favorite records of all time is Jellyfish's Spilt Milk, which I think is an undersung classic. To talk about a power pop album. It's another record that takes you on a journey. The people have been making records like that, but they don't tend to get the attention that I think they deserve. But I'm an old man, so what do I know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as far as Jellyfish goes, I've never really gotten into them. Every now and then, like my really respected music nerd friends will post about how great they are, and then I'll go back and listen to them, and it still hasn't clicked. But I feel like it's just a matter of just it not clicking, and it will at the right time. Like it's not like a band I listen to and I'll say I'll never like this. I'm like, it's not working today, but maybe in a couple years it'll work. Um, but as far as the musical smorgasbord that used to exist, I understand a little bit more in the age of streaming, where you have to hook someone based upon a single song, and then they're probably going to want more of that same from your catalog, and you want to kind of provide that itch. But before the age of streaming, like, when we're talking like 80s and 90s and early 2000s, I don't see why bands had to like hide in boxes. And as far as like other bands that I know, like peer bands and bands I've spoken to, a lot of them have expressed fear about like genre experimentation. And
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
unfortunately for us, with our second album, a lot of the critics thought we experimented too much, and so did the fans, and the sales were way less. And so it does go to show you that, like, it is like a ballsy, kind of risky move to do that. And maybe just, your generation maybe was just exposed to a wider array of music because, like, you had like the more rebellious, rock radio DJs who are like, man, I'm going to play this 12-minute song so I can go smoke a blunt and relax for a bit. And like, you don't have that culture anymore of people just like throwing weird stuff at the wall and being like, yeah, screw it. We're going to play like, 22-minute song on the radio. Why not? It's like, maybe because of like the power of Clear Channel and stuff, it's becoming more and more in boxes, and people are just being consuming what they're being spoon fed.
Yeah. Radio is in a terrible state, and I have no pity for it because they put themselves there. It's the and every radio station, I don't care what format it is, they all have this tight 40 songs or whatever it is that they play over and over and over again. Um, and that's enough, I think, to drive anyone but the casual listener nuts. I don't understand how people can listen to that all day, day in and day out, which is probably why radio is, it's going away. And it used to be, well, AM radio was always like that. That's sort of a different thing than what you're talking about was FM radio
Mm-hmm.
in its heyday, which was curated by the individual disc jockeys. Now it's just some faceless corporation that just programs the stuff in there, and the jockeys aren't even playing the music. It's just all piped in from, Kenosha, Wisconsin, or wherever the corporate headquarters
Right.
is. But it's the other thing about streaming is it's a fire hose, and how do you find what you want? So difficult when you have more music available to you now than ever before, and that's a great thing. The problem is that there's more garbage now than ever before.
Uh,
um
I'm glad someone else made that point because I have made this point so much with people of my generation, and none of them resonate with that point, and they're just like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm glad that someone else said that other than me. So thank you for that. So I don't feel
well,
like
I
I'm
mean,
taking
look,
crazy pills.
it has always been that popular music, I the majority of it, I don't know what the percentage is, but the majority of it, if you look at any year, what was on the pop charts, a lot of it is crap. And that's always been true. So the percentages, I'm not sure the percentages have changed. Let's say 60%, 70% of quote unquote popular music, right? What sells is crap and will not stay, will not stick. That percentage may be the same now. The problem is that it's the volume.
Hmm.
It's where there used to be 100 songs, now there's 10,000 songs, and so instead of having to wade through 60 songs to find the 40 good ones, you know what I mean. Now you've got to dig through 6,000 songs to find the 4,000 good ones.
And not only
And
that, the barrier to entry being lower, which means basically
right,
anyone can get stuff on Spotify. The problem
right,
is not everyone has like standards for quality. So I
right.
was I was talking with a guest on the last episode, and it's like, why don't you just release music that's not as high of a quality as you've done in the past? And I don't want to put stuff out there that I'd be embarrassed by, and I care about like the I don't you don't want to necessarily be a perfectionist and never let things out there and let the art be free, but you don't want to put crap out there. And I think a lot of people are just like, ah, I'm done, it's out, and there's so much of that flood in the marketplace that it's harder to define new great independent bands. And that's not to say there aren't tons of them. There are thousands upon thousands of great undiscovered
Absolutely.
bands, and you find them all the time, and they're amazing. And you also find a bunch of crap at the same time, and almost makes it like there's a party that doesn't want to do the digging because you're just miring through so much
Right.
garbage.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly it. You have to dig through such a larger pile of crap to find the gems. And the the one benefit that record companies brought to the business was, I don't want to say, I don't filter is not the right word, but you had producers who could nurture a talent, and you had record labels for a long time would keep an act through 4 or 5 records before they dropped them.
Hmm.
By the time you got to the 90s, like if your first album didn't sell, you were gone.
Yep.
There was no opportunity for you to grow and to get better and to be nurtured by a producer or by an A&R guy or whoever. Um, and let's face it, a lot of artists are not uh, they're not baked in a pan perfect. There's the very few who are brilliant from day one, but most artists have to refine. You got to work on it. It's a
Hmm.
skill. Um, it's like any other talent where you got to do it. You got to paint 100 pictures, 100 paintings before you create your masterpiece. And it helps if you have a great teacher to tell you how to mix those colors, and that's good, but if you did this it would be better. And there's no shame in that. That's We all have to learn. We all need mentors, and we all need the practice. And when you're just making music in your bedroom, you don't have that. And so it might seem great to you. I'm sure a lot of these people putting out stuff, I don't think that they're thinking like, well, this is good enough, I'll just put out this crap. I think they genuinely think that it's good, and they don't have anyone to say, that's a great idea, but work on this a little bit more. go back and rewrite that verse. That chorus it's not good enough. And when you had producers and sort of the industry around that for all the crap and all the damage they did, there was at least that aspect that that was the upside of it, is that in at least in the best situations, artists were given time to be nurtured and to grow and to work out uh, their skills and get better. A lot of the great bands, when you listen to like their first albums, not so great. It wasn't until they got to their third or fourth record
Hmm.
that,
Where
like,
they
now,
found their mojo, like
right,
so many bands,
yeah,
like Thin Lizzy. I mean, they didn't. Boys Are Back in
exactly,
Town was record 6, I think.
yeah,
Um,
at least, right,
yeah. So the third album had Whiskey in the Jar, but that was wasn't a hit in the states. It did well overseas, and so maybe that was enough to keep them on the label for a bit longer. But still, that's the third record. A lot of bands would have been dropped by that point.
right, yeah. You can imagine if they came around in the '90s, they would have maybe got their first two albums out, and the record company would have said, "See ya," and
Yeah.
we would never have those amazing records that came after that. Um,
Even bands that sold well, they dropped in the 90s. Like Warrant, had like, Dirty Rotten, Filthy Stinking Rich, and Cherry Pie, multi platinum albums. Their third album in the 90s still goes gold, sells 500,000 copies, but that's enough to drop them because it's that, it only sold 500,000.
right. Yeah, I mean that's the downside of it. That's the business side of it that just becomes that art has nothing to do with it, and it's all about commerce. Um, so I'm not a big fan by any stretch of big record companies. I'm just saying that
There were
there was a role
positives.
they played. Yeah, there was a beneficial role that they played.
They'd pay for Bob
Uh,
Ezrin.
exactly. Yeah, and when you had a great A&R guy who would who believed in the band would support them and keep them on the label for a handful of records until they really hit their stride. So it's just that's part of it that's lost. I mean, it's great that everyone can. The playing field is leveler now in the sense that anyone can spend a few $100 on a microphone and an interface and some software and start to make records in your bedroom and put it up and get people to listen to it. And there will be some great stuff that bubbles up out of that, but there'll be a lot of stuff that it's just not that good.
It's weird given like how left leaning I am generally politically, but when it comes to music, I think I'm a bit more conservative, which is like, you know what? No, this socialism is killing the arts. All this equal playing field stuff is ruining everything.
Yeah, well,
I'm just appreciating that point of irony.
yeah, no, I got it. I have mixed emotions about it too because you want it. You don't want anybody to feel like that they
Can't do it.
can't.
You don't want to prevent someone from doing it,
Right.
but you just wish they like I don't know had more discretion about what they put out.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like share it with your friends, but you don't necessarily have to get it on YouTube and Spotify and every source thinking that it's that great.
But then again,
But
people
I
say
mean,
that
that's
about my music, and so what do I know?
yeah. Well, it's just the challenge of kind of the whole social media world that we live in, where we're all too self-absorbed. I think.
Oh, I hate the social media world. I'm actually mostly off it. So like I do like my couple like posts that sync to all my accounts a day. But like I'm not spending much time on it, which is actually great. Um, Spending more time writing and exercising and listening to stuff I like. So it just uh, and it's funny that like as I've gotten off it much more is like right when you join Facebook. So like I don't see your posts too much because I'm not on that much.
Yeah, well, I had to be dragged kicking and screaming onto Facebook because I didn't want to have anything to do with any social media. I just have always felt, just as a culture, we're already too self-absorbed, and all social media does is just encourage you to think that everything you do is fast. We're also fascinated with ourselves. That what I'm eating for lunch is so fascinating that I just have to share it.
I mean, I like
Like,
sharing what I'm eating for lunch.
I mean, it's just,
But also I like
just
seeing what other people are eating for lunch. Like, oh man, that looks good.
I'm just not into it. I'm sorry, man. I had to be dragged onto it. The only reason why I got on Facebook was because that's the primary place to, to pump your podcast. And
Yeah.
so that's how I ended up on Facebook. And I'm kind of like you. I do maybe maybe two posts a day. Generally, I do one a day. And it's usually not a super personal thing. It'll just be, um, I'm not posting pictures of my kids and stuff like that.
Uh,
I don't know why anyone would be interested.
I post pictures
But I
of my
guess my
kids,
kids,
my baby kitty. I post pictures of my cat all the time because she's adorable. But also, I like seeing the pictures of cats. I like the cute pet photos. I like the food photos, and generally, like if I'm making a post, it's like an accountability thing where it's like, hey, I've doing it like a public diary saying like, hey, I met my daily goals of like personal improvement today. I'm feeling good, or art that I'm excited about because I'm often sharing like, oh, I just saw this movie. It's great. You guys should see it or listen to this album. It's great. And so I enjoy seeing the artistic recommendations in my feed. Like I don't know, I'm just very light with my stuff. Sometimes political,
yeah, that's fine.
you
That's
know.
fine. I just think that, when you spend your whole life
Oh yeah, don't
basically
spend your whole
on
day on
Twitter,
there. No,
you know,
I don't get
uh,
Twitter.
no, that was the one I was absolutely avoiding and refused to really get on. I just don't.
I mean,
The
I'm
world does
honest.
not need another tweet.
I'm on Twitter, and I've made friends through Twitter. I've had fans of my podcast like reach out to me on Twitter, and so I'll get a notification like, "Who the hell is tweeting at me?" And then they'll just be very nice and polite, and then like, "Oh, now you're my friend. That's cool." So Twitter has been like positive for me, but like I'm never on it. I don't see. I how articulate can your thoughts be in like 3 sentences max?
Yeah, that's it. But again, I am an introvert. I don't. I'm really uncomfortable with small talk, and that's all you can do in the space of a Twitter. Really, is small talk. I'm
No, you
more than
can
happy.
argue so much on Twitter.
Oh, I know, but it's not. What you and I are doing now. This I enjoy because we're having, I hope, a meaningful conversation. Um, but trying to do this in 128 words or whatever, letters or whatever the hell it is, it's like all you're doing is just encourages snark
It
and
does.
doesn't get at anything deep when you're just trying to get the snarkiest thing out in a handful of words. um, I would much rather just have this kind of meaningful conversation or not talk at all. I'm fine with not talking at all.
Yeah. Well, I've actually heard. I have a number of comedian friends. They actually say that Twitter is actually really great comedy training because it makes you distill a joke into like the purest and tightest form possible, and it's helped their stand up. So, from a comedian perspective, I think that's actually a useful tool because it forces you to work within these really tight constraints. Um, But for humanity at large, Twitter is largely terrible. Ironically, because I signed up for Parler when it first came out because I was curious, it's actually a better platform than Twitter in terms of like the amount of space they allow for conversation. But everyone on there is a right wing nut job, and so it's like, why would you be on there? So like when it first came out, I'm like, well, maybe this won't be a right wing dumpster fire, and then it was. But like theoretically in concept Parler's actually better than Twitter is a hot take of mine, not in execution but in concept.
Mhm. Yeah, well, like I said, I'm not crossing any of those bridges. I'm just do it the old fashioned way. Try to put out my podcast and a couple of posts on Facebook and talk like people we're doing right now.
Yeah, what was the I forget who said it, but the modern American attention span is either 3 seconds or 3 hours. That's the bite-sized content or long form, which is
Or
which is ironically as you try to keep your podcast tight and trim. I'm like, man, go as long as the conversation extends.
yeah, well, for me, that's one of the goals of my podcast, and it's a differentiator more than anything because there's lots of long form rambling conversation podcasts out there, and I enjoy a lot of them. But I just didn't feel like the world needed another one. So my
Except
idea was
mine.
to do something that was tighter. Oh, of course, yours is top of the heap, king of the hill.
Right.
Um, but I was just aiming to do something that was a little bit tighter, and the
Differentiate yourself.
typical commute to work for people is what, 20-30 minutes. I wanted to do something you could listen to and on your way into work, and by the time you pulled into the parking lot at work, it would be done. Or by the time you left work and got pulled into your driveway, you would have consumed an entire episode comfortably.
Man, I don't know where you're working where the commute is 20 to 30 minutes. Like maybe it's because Nashville has just become just crazy overpopulated city, but like it's easily like 40 minutes to an hour if you're commuting. I'm luckily working from home now, so I'm not commuting, but long form um, was very helpful in those times, and also double speed for the long form. Do you double speed
oh,
anything?
I cannot. It gives me anxiety. There's something about people talking that fast that just it ramps up my. And I'm not a person with a lot of anxieties. I'm pretty chill. But there's something about hearing people talking that fast that just makes me anxious. It makes me uncomfortable. So I don't listen to anything on fast speed. I listen to everything. And when I do my show, as you know, my show is scripted, and that I'm not just winging it like I am now. I actually, because I'm trying to be tight, I'm trying to get a lot into a short amount of time. I do write it out, and I put a lot of thought into the pacing
Well,
of
see, you're trying to be commercial.
the
I'm
show.
just trying to be authentic, man.
Well, no, I'm trying to.
I know I'm just
It's
busting
not
your
about being
chops.
commercial. It's not about being commercial. It's about how I feel like the information is best absorbed, where the pauses are, where the speed at which you say things. So, and I know there's people out there who listen to it on faster speeds. And say that irritates me a little bit because I put so much work into the pacing of it. It's paced exactly the way I want you to listen to it. God damn it.
Man, I listen to myself on double speed when I'm like going back and like checking through stuff. Like there are there are certain things I will listen to on single speed. So like I'll listen to you on single speed. Like certain things where
You're
like the
just saying that now because I called you out.
okay, I listen to some episodes on single speed. So it really depends. But like for example, like that Bad for Good episode you did for us, I listen to that all the time. But that's on double speed because I've heard it so many times. And I just want to, re-savor that experience. But like, yeah, you do pay attention to the rhythm and pacing, and there are certain like, like I have a number of shows I rotate in, and for like certain comedy shows, I'm like, okay, I don't want to listen to this at double speed because the humor gets affected by increasing the
Right,
speed. So
right.
like, I I,
Yes,
I get that.
yeah, that specifically with comedy, there's a rhythm to it. Like you said, the guys on Twitter, that's part of the refining. A good joke it's got a rhythm, it's got a pacing to it, and when you mess with that, you're not getting the ultimate experience. It's like listening to a song on double speed.
I do that
Um,
sometimes.
only if I would want to get through it faster.
I've done that a number of times where Steve has made me listen to shitty albums for the podcast. And what I do is, because Steve usually makes me listen to stuff that's like not catchy in the slightest, I like to at least remember what we're talking about when we're doing the podcast. So I brute force it into my brain by listening to it once on normal speed and then each song 4 times in a row on double speed, just so the hooks, quote unquote, are just implanted in my brain. So when it comes time to do the episode, I actually remember it. But if it's actually good, I'll listen to it on normal speed. But often when it's Steve's choice, it isn't good. So I just have to just bludgeon it into my brain so I can actually remember what the hell it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, you're a braver man than I. I don't think I could. I don't think I could do it.
Yeah, if you some of the albums that he's made us listen to, like, they've been so bad.
I'm sure he feels the same about the music that you bring. So.
No, not all the time. Like, pretty much everyone on the Bat Out of the Hell episode unanimously agreed it was a fantastic album, that I brought something great to the table. And then the next week we did Steve's, and everyone unanimously agreed we don't remember what this sounds like. So,
Uh,
but there's a difference between one of the top selling albums of all time and this really niche Nintendo Core album that maybe 1,000 people listen to.
as long as Steve's happy, that's all that matters.
I mean, that is all that matters. And the thing is, like, he writes a lot of good stuff too, and I'm so glad that he writes pop music instead of the stuff that he listens to, so I can like his music and not pretend that I like it. That is the rough part about being friends with musicians, is when like their band isn't good and you have to pretend that they're good. Like every time my friends talk to me about my band, they have to pretend that we're good.
Yeah, yeah. Well, musicians are, and they're also sensitive. We're also sensitive. Most of us don't take criticism all that well.
I take
We
it
can
pretty
pretend
well.
to.
I take it okay because like I'm usually like aware of it. So it's more just like if you make good faith, intelligent criticism, I likely agree with you. If it's bad faith and dumb, I'm just annoyed that you just like made a bad argument in a bad case. So, but like good faith criticism of my art, I'm all down for. It's just like
Yeah,
art that
for me, it's always like I'm always right on the verge of this is terrible anyway. Like, my confidence or whatever is just like, ugh. Like, I feel good about it one day, and the next time, like, oh, it's not good enough. So, I'm teetering right on that ledge. It doesn't take much for somebody to say, yeah, it's not that good or whatever. They push me right over the brink. And you're right, I'm terrible. I'm just going to erase everything and dig a hole and bury those tapes or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm just like, oh man, I'm a good songwriter, but I am like Jim Steinman in that my stuff is very corny and over the top, and I'm not a good singer. And if you don't like the vocals, hey, me neither. Cool, we agree on that point. Oh, you think the lyrics are cheesy? Yep, that is true. Moving on. The life of the artist. I am glad that like I've semi-retired from music, so I can enter into my true introvert mode and hide and not talk to people instead of talking to you. One of the reasons I got the podcast back going is like, man, I should actually socialize with humans, and by socialize I mean do Skype phone calls and record them.
Yeah, it's I feel bad saying it, but because I know there has been real suffering in the last year or so, but I've kind of loved it. Not the suffering.
No, not the suffering. You're not a sadist.
No.
Or
I feel
not willing to
bad. I
admit
mean,
that on
people have
mic.
lost jobs, people have died. I get all of that,
Yeah.
and it's awful. It's awful. But for me, I'm lucky in that I haven't gotten sick. No one in my family's gotten sick.
Mm-hmm.
None of us lost our jobs. We were all very lucky. And I work from home 100% of the time now, and I have been trying to do that for 10 years. And I couldn't get them to do it. And then suddenly when they were forced that everyone had to work from home, they figured out, you know what? This works. People can actually work from home. And I was like, oh, because talk about a commute. Originally I had an hour and a half commute each way.
Oof.
With no traffic. It was an hour and a half each way. And then I moved a little closer, it became an hour commute, but each way. But still, I much rather have zero commute and work
Yeah,
from home and not have to deal with all the interoffice stuff.
politics and just the small
Everyone
talk
I
of
worked
just like,
with was
oh, it's
great.
Friday. You're sure right. It is that day of the week.
Yeah,
Great
exactly. Like I
conversation,
said,
pal.
as an introvert, I hate small talk, and everyone I work with is they're all good people. It's there's no a-holes in my office, but it doesn't mean that I'm comfortable talking about the weather. And I hate sports. I sorry, folks, I hate sports. And, the Boston area is a big sports is always, how about the Sox? How about the Celtics, the Bruins? I could care less. I don't want to hear about it.
I mean,
I don't
but
want to talk about it.
the Sox and the Celtics are pretty good, bro.
I don't care. I do not care. Uh, it's so this quarantine time has been wonderful for me, and I don't, I don't want it to end. So
Are they
that's
letting
my
you
terrible,
stay
selfish
working from home?
attitude. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's been proven to work perfectly well. So I will not have to go into the office anymore. And nor will anyone else, frankly. We're all good to work from home if that's what we choose. And, but yeah, so it's just kind of back to that thing of being an introvert and not being around and not socializing. And I don't really miss any of that. Uh, you guys, my podcasting friends that I've met through Rock and Pod and whatnot. It's that's my social life, and I'm perfectly fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, because I was doing like the band thing, and so much of it was like the politics of that and the hustle, and always booking the gigs and working with the venue and working with the other bands and working with the other band members and making sure everyone gets paid and reminding people about the shows, and then when you're at the show making the small talk with people, and then not just your shows but going to other shows, being present in the scene, being friendly, going and like having the large network. And the thing is, like, I like people, but I got burnt out on that process, and especially when like we hit a wall musically, and like the crowd size died and the merch sales died, and it's just like all that work and effort, it's just like it just wasn't worth it anymore. And
Mhm.
it's there's the part of me that just like does miss going out and hanging out with friends, but there's, I think, in my heart of hearts, I've wondered, am I an introvert or an extrovert? I think, to like the outside observer, when people would look at me, they think, "Oh yeah, hardcore extrovert." I think I'm just an introvert who just really sold himself really well for a while. But I'm like, man, I'm glad to be hanging out with my books again. This is awesome.
Yeah, I totally get that. I, as a guitar player and songwriter, I've been in bands. I'm not currently in a band, but for most of my life, since since really junior high school, I've been in bands of some kind or another, and I always had dreams of that was going to be my career, um, and it obviously never happened. And it took me a long time to realize that above and beyond whether or not I was actually talented enough to do it, and I don't, I, I'm, I'm too close to myself to be able to say if I was ever any good enough as a guitar player, good enough as a songwriter or whatever. But just above and beyond that, I could never do what you did. Uh, the the that schmoozing part of it, I do not have that in me.
Did it for 10
And
years, buddy.
I couldn't. I realized like that's why I'm not getting any gigs because I'm not doing that. But I could not. I physically could not bring myself to do it. I was so uncomfortable. It's I can get on stage in front of 1,000 people and it not bat an eye. I have no stage fright, but walk off the stage and have to talk to two or three people. It's so uncomfortable. I want to run into the bathroom and hide.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. And the thing is, I think there was a part of me that always had that, but I just did it anyway. It just like bit the bullet. Like, the way I met like the residency guys was literally walking backstage at their show without permission and just hanging out in the green room and being like, "What's up? I just moved to town. Want to be friends?" So like, I don't know where I got the balls to do such stuff, honestly, but I just. It's like the Nike slogan. I know you hate sports, but you just got to do it. Maybe if you just, watched more Bulls games in the 90s, you'd have that motivation to just get shit done, bro.
No, it's this. It's I'm a hardcore introvert in that aspect, and as to why, then I can do a gig and it doesn't bother me. It's
There's a
there's a
disconnect.
great
You're not
there's a
like.
well, there's a fantastic book about being an introvert that if you are at all interested in it, I highly recommend it to anyone who's watching or listening. It's called Quiet, and I forget the name of the author. It's a woman. It's a fantastic book to understand if you are an introvert, to better understand yourself. If you're married to an introvert or you have a child who's an introvert, I highly recommend this book because it really explains. It's the first book I ever read where I saw myself on every page. And there's a part where they talk about a very successful college professor, I think, who's a total introvert, uh, who does lectures in front of rooms of thousands of students. There's no problem with that, but again, has complete discomfort with small talk, you know, small conversations with people, just feels incredibly awkward and will literally go and hide in the men's room in between lectures so that he doesn't have to do that. And basically the way they kind of explain it is when the reward or your passion for doing something is strong enough that it overrides what that comfort, so that if you love being on stage playing, if you just love playing guitar enough, you can get on stage and do that, and it overrides whatever that discomfort might be of knowing there's people out there looking at you. But when the guitar gets taken off at the end of the set and you don't have that and you have to talk to people again, then all of that rushes back to the surface and you're paralyzed again. Um, I probably muffed that explanation a little bit,
Right.
but it's really well articulated in the book. And for the first time, it made me understand why I'm able to do this one thing that seems totally incongruous with the rest of how I behave around people.
Oh,
Um,
so I think my introvert thing is a very different animal. Um, in that my introvert thing is that I like working on my writing, and I just need my alone time to do that. And so it's like, man, I don't want to talk about the weather or some stupid shit with you. Like, if I'm going to talk with you, I want it to be meaningful and enrich my life. Otherwise, I got cool shit I want to do. So, like, see ya. So I think that's more my introvert thing, which I don't know. I don't know if that does make me an extrovert because I do like people, but it's just like I like having my time to just get my stuff done.
yeah, no, I get it. And one mistake that's often this podcast has become a whole introvert thing. I didn't think we were going to go here,
Well,
but
that's the beauty of long form unscripted, where we don't know where we're gonna go.
the
Mister
the
10-minute podcast.
the whole thing about introverts being antisocial is they're two different things. Introverts are not antisocial. We do not hate people. It's just
We hate
the
most people. No, I'm kidding.
well, it's no, it's just the comfort level is just sort of a different thing. And it's like anything else, it's a scale. You're not either 100% introvert or 100% extrovert.
Mhm.
Most people are are in the middle somewhere on that scale, and in different situations they lean more one way or another. Um, so that there are different ways in being an introvert or being an extrovert. They manifest themselves in different ways. Um, but just in general, the an extrovert gets energized by interaction with people. The car salesman who just does it, who just that lights their fire for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whereas for an introvert, that same interaction, it's not energizing. It's it's exhausting. You don't feed off it. It feeds off of you.
Mm-hmm.
It sucks something out of you. And at the end of the day, you're not beat. You, when if you're an extrovert, you're not beat up at the end of the day. You know, you feel rewarded, you feel whatever. But if you're an introvert and you've had a whole day of interaction like that, you feel exhausted. You just want to crawl in bed. It's like something out of you. But where you get energized is in the quiet moments, the private moments, the working, the writing, the songwriting, the playing the guitar by yourself, or whatever it is, that energizes you. And at the end of that, you feel your sense of accomplishment. You feel like you're ready to go out and walk 10 miles or whatever it is because you got the energy. Whereas for an extrovert, they would feel like they've been trapped
Yeah.
if they had to sit inside and work on a book
Oh
for
yeah.
12 hours a
And
day
me,
or
I'm just
whatever it
like,
is.
oh man, let me work on that book for 12 hours, so then I'll feel great. Like that is my
Yeah.
fuel, which I think is just I don't know, I think I'm just a sucker for storytelling. It's just like I love creating stories and I love absorbing stories. It's the annoying thing with the human lifespan is like, man, I'm not going to get through all the books and movies and
Mhm.
stuff I want to consume. I'm going to die before I get to consume all that. And I want to make stuff too. Shit, what's going to have to get pushed and pushed off the list? So it's I would say I'm almost like addicted to story consumption because I just, like anytime that I'm not doing anything, I'm thinking of a story I want to read or a story I want to write. And it's like always in the mind. Like anytime where I have downtime, that's like always what's going through my head.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, stories, I mean, they're essential to who we are as people. Um, Stories tell us about ourselves, tells us things about each other that sometimes just saying it straight doesn't do it justice, if you know what I mean. Um, you learn about yourself and about other people through stories in a way that just reading the pure facts,
Hmm.
it's not the same. We're all humans in every culture. Stories are a huge part of what makes us who we are. So, yeah, stories are important.
I think that's one reason I wanted to be one part of my drive to be successful in music was trying to turn my own life into a narrative because I became so obsessed with narrative that I was using my actual life as like one of the canvases for a story.
Mhm.
And so but letting go of that has been ultimately, very healthy in the long run. Um, but because the diehard music fans, we know the stories of these bands and their histories,
Yeah,
deeper than just the behind the music, but like the biographies we've read, the documentaries, the times we've scoured the Wikipedia articles, just that desire for knowing like the journey that led them to create this piece of art that touched your
exactly.
soul.
Yes. Yep. That's sometimes the song is just the tip of the iceberg. And there's so much beneath that that uh, the more you learn about it, the more fascinating it becomes, the more it makes the song interesting. Um, Usually, the more you learn about a song, the better it gets.
Yeah, I mean the a song that came up in the last podcast I did, we were talking about the Poison song "Something to Believe in," where if you know the story behind that song, it just makes that entire experience so much deeper. And yeah, I've defended Poison on my channel before. I'll defend them again. You know what? If freaking people are gonna worship the Ramones, they can be fine with Poison. Is what I say about that.
Yeah, it's interesting, that this gets us back into the whole thing of authenticity and why one band is more authentic than the other. Because the Ramones, it was total artifice
Yeah, it
in the
was
sense like
completely
none of them are
calculated.
named Ramon. That's
But Brett Michaels
uh,
writing a ballad about his dead friend and mourning the loss of one of his, closest companions, that's corporate BS. But the Ramones are true artists. Like, I don't. I don't get that.
Yeah, I mean, look, whatever works for you. I'm not going to die on the hill for either of these bands,
I
but
mean, I like both bands. I like both bands,
yeah,
but I
sure.
don't get the slagging of Poison necessarily. Because there, yes, like there were the dumb sleazy party songs, but there were also the dumb sleazy party songs for Kiss and Aerosmith and Van Halen, and everyone like has zero complaints about those bands, even though the musical skill of like early Kiss could be pretty comparable to early Poison in terms of like the
Mhm.
actual talent of playing the instruments. Um, but I think like that same level of sincerity is there, and in maybe Poison's case, more sincerity because they didn't just sing about getting laid like Kiss did for the first like 8 albums. Like they actually sang about deeper subjects in addition to the party songs. So I don't know that criticism. I always perplexed me.
Yeah, it's
It feels like
it
intellectualizing, saying like I just think they suck. Like if you just were just honest as I just don't like it. It's fine, but like it feels like they have to like wrap it in all these other reasons why they say the band isn't good when that's not actually the case of their legitimate criticisms. You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying, and it gets back to what I said back at the beginning of the podcast, more or less, where it's very difficult ultimately to defend why you like something or why you don't like something, because it's ultimately, it just comes down to, look, if the Ramones float your boat and you think Poison is crap, it's ultimately, that's just the way the music hits you and the way it affects you and what you like to hear. And you can try to build that up into some argument about why one's authentic and one is commercial crap. But I mean, like you said, you're just kind of, ultimately, it's, you just don't like it, and and that's fine. You cannot like it.
Yeah, I think
You don't
I
have to. Yeah, you don't have to eat in any direction. You don't really have to tear something down. It's just, you just don't like it. It just doesn't work for you. That's fine. There's plenty of music that does. And I don't talk a lot about music that I don't like, because there's so much that I do, and I just rather talk about the stuff that I really like. And that's, there's joy in that. There's not, you shouldn't find, I know some people find joy in ragging on stuff, but that's not my preferred mode. I'd rather
well,
just talk about
hey,
the stuff I
your
love. I'd
takedown of
rather
Bad for
shine a
Good
light
was
in the
magical.
darkness.
That was magical. That was I still think the best thing you've ever done. Even though you like talk about stuff you like, you savagely taking down music you don't like was amazing. Even though it's my
Oh,
favorite record, I adored
I
that because
don't think
like
I wouldn't say I was savage. I think I think that's a little bit extreme. I think I just, I called out a
brutally
few things
demolished
that
it into the pavement.
oh, come on now. Um, again, there's a lot of artists I love on that
But
record.
all the criticism was valid. I think that's why it was great. Like it's not that I can't recognize the flaws in it. I think I just like good faith arguments better.
Mhm.
So like if someone like genuinely disagrees with me and has a good faith argument, like I'm willing to go there. I'm just I'm so burnt on just like these really stupid lazy arguments. Like my arguments about grunge are things like you can't really argue with. That the melodies aren't as strong, there isn't that much of an emphasis on pop hooks, they tend to mumble, the guitar tones tend to be muddier. Like that's you can't really argue those points because they're facts about the music, and whether or not those are like good or bad things is open to debate. And there's obviously nuance where like there's certain Nirvana songs that are actually very poppy, and so like painting with broad strokes and willing to acknowledge those points. But just bad faith arguments, it's just it just I hear them all the time. They just suck up all the energy in the room.
Yeah, well, that's why I would just rather not spend time talking about stuff that I don't like. I would rather talk about stuff that I do like. And it's the negativity is it's just not, it's and you can't win an argument about art, I don't think. I would more or less agree with what you've said about grunge. Uh, but if you don't care that there's not a lot of pop hooks and the guitars sound perfectly fine to you, more power to you. It does me no harm for you to like something that I don't like,
Yeah.
you know? Um, so have at it.
No,
Just
I agree.
don't don't try to convince me that it's the greatest thing. Don't harp on it with me because I'm not going to harp on it with you.
And
Um,
don't go out of your way to tell me that the thing I like is crap and how this is good. Although I think I am guilty of doing that with grunge sometimes. Um, but I think that's also just a generational thing for me because it was just worshipped from my generation. And just everyone thought it was like the best stuff ever was 90s grunge, bro. And I think just growing up with that made me more adversarial towards it than maybe I would have been otherwise. Um, so acknowledging the bias there.
yeah, you got to be aware of your own biases, but it's perfectly fine to have them in cases like this. Because again, it's just taste. Again, it's some people like chocolate, some people like vanilla, some people like both.
So I have a question for you.
Strawberry.
With
Yes.
all the difficulties, because I largely got out of the podcasting game in some ways with the lipstick panel because of the copyrighted music thing where they're making it harder to have your podcast appear on different platforms if you have copyrighted music in there. Um, how is your podcast doing with that? And have you thought about moving any of your stuff onto YouTube? Because that seems to be a platform where that is, there's, the extreme popularity of reaction channels, which is a lot of breaking down a song. Um, Usually, first time listens, but also like Rick Beato has his YouTube channel that has done well for him, where he is breaking down the songs. Have you thought about doing something with that platform? And how are things going with the platforms that you're on? Are you encountering any difficulties with that?
Well, there's a bunch to unpack there. So when I first thought about doing something like this, my original thought was to do it as a video show, to have a video component to it. I decided against it. Um, because it would be 5 times the work,
Yeah, buddy.
and I don't get paid to do this.
Yeah, buddy.
I don't have the time.
Patreon. Get that sweet,
Um,
sweet Patreon cash. By the way,
uh,
thank you to the people who still support me on Patreon, even though I'm basically just doing one video a week. But I will have exclusive stuff coming soon to the Patreon, so thank you.
yeah, man. Thanks for supporting Greg,
Yeah,
so I don't have to.
thanks. You support me by showing up, pal.
Um, but yeah, so it's a lot more work. I don't have any particular interest in having my face all over the screen. It's not about that for me. Um, and I just figured I could do everything I needed to do in the context of an audio only podcast. Um, so no, I don't have any plans to turn it into a video show, but was something that I thought about.
I mean, you could just stick up the just a thumbnail. You could just have a single still image,
Yeah,
and then have the
but
audio.
then I just kind of feel like, well, what's the point of that?
Some
Just
people listen to their podcasts on YouTube. I know a number of people who do that.
yeah.
And the algorithm recommends it to them. It's just like your content seems tailor made for the YouTube consumer because it's also the perfect length for like a YouTube video. So it's like it's almost from my perspective as a friend and fan of the show and someone who spends more time on YouTube than I should because it's sort of like my background for the day while working
Mhm.
because it's an easy way to like get a mixture of like music I like and also podcasts and also content that's only on YouTube. your stuff is like the length of the kind of stuff that YouTube wants creators to create that is pushed. And with the YouTube music community, it feels like an untapped audience for you.
I'm sure there's some truth to that. I mean, I'll revisit. I have to figure out how to do it. I don't know that I would just want to put one still image up, but at the same time, I don't want to deal with editing camera angles and all of that nonsense. So I don't know if there's some kind of happy medium that I could do. It's worth thinking about.
It just seems like the perfect place for your stuff, especially
Well,
with
I mean,
like platforms taking off copyrighted music.
yeah. Although I know Rick Beato and plenty of folks who've gotten takedown notices from YouTube, so you're certainly not
Oh, so have
safe
I.
on YouTube.
So it's not
Uh,
completely safe. I mean, I got one of the reasons I stopped doing my like I used to do one reaction per day on the channel, and usually just viewer requests, and then I do Thin Lizzy Thursdays, and then enough got blocked where I was like, man, I spent all this time on this, screw it, and then Thin Lizzy stuff never got blocked. I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna keep doing this thing because it's not getting blocked, and I like
mhm.
it, and we've already done so many of them. But yeah, it is a problem on YouTube, but it's lesser than on other platforms, and especially if you break up the song like you do. Um, so it would work. Like I said, it's a format I think would work well for your content.
Yeah, I hear you. As you know, my show, as originally formulated, I after I did the breakdown and the summary at the end, I would play the entire track at the end of the show, so that as a listener, you've heard it all taken apart. Now hear it as it was meant to be heard as a whole. I don't do that anymore. I do like a 30-second clip at the end, and then I fade it out. And it doesn't break my heart to do that. I think that was the least essential part of the show. Um, at the same time, it was the part that exposed me the most to being taken down. So I felt like that was a fair compromise to just not do that anymore. Um, I don't think it hurts the show that much, but I preferred it when it was there. Um, but again,
It was nice. It was nice. I'm not gonna lie.
yeah, but it doesn't take away anything from the show. I don't
Well,
think
see, in
really.
YouTube, you can just hey, check out
Right.
the
If you
original
want
in
to
the
hear the song
description.
again, you can pull it up on Spotify or
Yeah.
on YouTube or wherever you're already listening to the show. You can just, if you really want to hear it again, you can find it. So it's not a big deal. Um, yeah. So the whole music rights thing is incredibly thorny and difficult. Uh, and you probably know all of this stuff, but the 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 way the record companies and the RIAA are looking at it is that they want to get paid for every play. This is about the only way they make money, and the rates are minuscule. I mean, artists literally make fractions of pennies on streaming, uh, and the record companies make a little bit more, but not what they used to make.
Hmm.
And so they're looking for any way that they can recoup as much of that money as possible. And so uh, when you play a song on your show, that's, let's say it's 3 minute song. That's 3 minutes that people could be listening to something they make money on instead of you.
Well, see,
You
here's
know what I'm
here's
saying?
here's what I don't get about that as to
Well,
why there's so many takedown notices because the way that YouTube does it, and I guarantee the other places would have the technology for, is that it auto detects the song, and then if your video makes money, it just goes to the record company and the songwriter. So I don't get why they just don't extend that to the podcast on the different platforms and just like, hey, we detected the song, uh, so Al Green is going to get some cash for it, or the Gibb brothers for writing it, or whoever. You know, like we're going to give them a little scratch because we detected it in your podcast, and so you, the podcast creator, won't get paid for it. But if there's a system that automatically pays the artist for it, I don't see why they couldn't just do that.
well, there's been discussions around the idea that, let's say, uh, my podcast gets played on Spotify, and I get no money from my podcast. I do it for free. I don't do. There's no revenue generated by my show. I'm not making any money on it. That's not my goal. But if I played a song on my show, the why shouldn't Spotify? Because Spotify, if they're playing, let's say, I don't know, let's say they're playing Love Gun by our favorite band Kiss, they're paying a rights fee or a license fee or whatever you want to call it, the fraction of a penny to Kiss and to the record company. So if my show is on Spotify and I play Love Gun, maybe they should pay the same thing because it's being played on my show. In other words, it's a play, regardless of whether I'm involved or not. It's still a play. I'm not making any money on it. So there's been conversations around things like that, that a play of a song on a podcast would generate the same amount of revenue as if it was just played directly on whatever that streaming service is. And they're paying for it either way. So it
Yeah,
wouldn't
that
be
seems
like
like that'd be a win for everybody.
you would think. And you would think that the way what we do as podcasters is we're promoting music. Most of the time, we're not
For
playing
free. Yeah,
hits.
we're promoting it for free. It's like, hey, this is cool. You should check it
Right,
out. You listen to it
right,
once in the podcast, and then you likely listen to it again on your own, which is repeat
right. Or
streams, and buy
you
it.
buy an MP3 file, you buy the CD, whatever it is. You go out, you buy a ticket to see the band. You
If you
know,
care enough to listen to a music podcast, you're probably a music fan and one of the few people who's still paying for that.
right, right. So it is short-sighted, but the way that they see it, like I was saying, is they see if somebody is spending 10 minutes listening to my podcast and they're not making any money on it, that's 10 minutes of that person's day that they're not spending listening to Spotify or wherever where they do get paid. And that's how they look at it. And so all podcasters are exposed in some degree to this potential takedown when you're using licensed music. And of course, everything that I do is I'm not playing my own music. I'm playing the music that I love and I want to push. There is the thorny argument of what they call fair use, which says that if you're adding something to it, if you're critiquing, you're commenting on your some educational component, there's some flexibility in the rules where you're allowed to do that, and that's really difficult to codify that.
Hmm.
That would be my argument, is that, look,
Yours
if
is
you
definitely
have
under
a
fair use.
if
Absolutely.
I totally agree. If you have a podcast, and there used to be a lot of them out there where somebody would just grab a bunch of their favorite records and they would pretend they were Mr. DJ, and they would play, here's a song by Iron Maiden, I love this song, and they'd play it. And then after that, here's a song by Metallica, I like this song too, and they'd play that. And in that case, you are completely exposed to being shut down because A, you're playing the entire track, and B, you're not contributing anything.
Hmm.
You're not adding to it. You're not, there's no value add, if you want to use that word, to it. What somebody like Rick Beato does
It's
is
educational.
clearly
It's clearly fair use.
right, right. There's comment, and that all of that is in there. And yet he gets takedown notices, and he's way bigger than I am. The main reason why I got one, and it was for the one Beatles episode I did, and that's because Apple and Beatles, Prince, the Eagles, those are probably the three most I don't want to say litigious, but they're the you run the most risk if you're playing any of those three artists
Yeah.
in terms of being potentially taken
Zeppelin
down.
used to be a lot like that, but they've loosened up.
Could be. I have a Zeppelin episode that'll be coming out this summer, so we'll see
We'll
what
we'll
happens.
find out.
We
Stay
will.
tuned, or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, but for the most part, I fly so far under the radar because I don't have a million listeners that so far it hasn't really been an issue for me. Um, but as the show grows, there's more and more potential for things like that to happen. And my hope is that by the time, if I ever get big enough that it matters, that by then this will have been figured out in some fashion where whether it's the streaming services, the last thing I don't want to have to cough up any money for this because I'm not making any money on it. Um, and my goal is to promote this music. I view my what I do on my show and what many of us are doing as podcasters is we are archiving this history. I take that very seriously. I don't take myself that seriously, but I take what we do with these shows very seriously because this is music. These artists we're losing a lot of these artists every week. You get a news report of some drummer or bass player or lead singer of some band has
Hmm.
passed away. And that this music will fade. And we need to keep this music alive because it's an important part of our shared history. And it doesn't matter if you didn't grow up in the 60s or 70s because the music you're listening to today, if you care about any music that you're listening to today, you can draw a straight line back through history to the music that got you to the point where you're listening to the stuff that you're listening to today. It doesn't matter if it's rock or hip hop or whatever. Everything is influenced by something else, and that was influenced by something else, and you can trace that back. And I think for the casual listener, you'll just listen to what's ever on the radio or it's ever playing on Spotify, and you're fine with that. But if you're a fan, if you really this music really touches you, then suddenly you want to know, well, who made that song? Who's in that band? And then how did they write that song? What inspired them? And you find out, oh, that band was inspired by the Rolling Stones. So you explore the Rolling Stones and you go, well, who inspired them? And you go back and you find Elmore James and Chuck Berry and who inspired them? And you follow this back.
Hmm.
And that's part of the joy of being a fan of anything,
Absolutely.
of the deep dives and discovering how this got to be, how we got to where we are today. This one song that I love today, where it came from. And there's a history that goes way back through recorded music history. And I think what we're all trying to do as podcasters is contribute our piece to that. We're trying to preserve that. We're trying to archive it. We're trying to keep that music alive for future generations. We're trying to get people who've never heard it to discover it, for people who maybe grew up with it but forgot about it. I haven't listened to that album in 20 years. Bring it back. So I, you know, I feel like I'm doing a service. I don't want to get on a soapbox, but I do feel like what we do is valuable. And I don't feel like we should now start to have to pay out of our pocket some record company because we're doing a job that really they should be doing
Right.
by preserving and promoting this music. Um, so hopefully there's a way that between the record companies and the streaming services, the providers, all of that, the platforms, all of that, they figure out some way, because I don't want these artists to starve either. I want them to get paid. Uh, I want the artists I love to continue to make a living and to survive into old age and have health care and all those kind of things. And they deserve to get their royalty checks. So I'm not trying to steal anybody's royalty checks. Um, so that's, it's a tough issue how we get to the point where everybody's going to be satisfied. It's more, the more you dig into it, the more complex it gets.
What do you ultimately see as the legacy for, let's say, the boomer generation music 100 years from now? Like, is it the kind of thing where it's just like a niche curiosity, the way that like someone might check out Robert Johnson today? Or, do we view it as like, some of them get elevated to the greats on like a Beethoven type level? Like, where do you see the legacy of these acts? Do any of them have longevity that really continues, or is it just the Beatles and that's it? Like, what do you think would be in terms of like its role in culture and human history. Like, where do you think it goes from here?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the million-dollar question: is uh, what art sticks and what fades away. But I would like to think that most of the music from the '60s and '70s and '80s was probably going to be like a Robert Johnson kind of thing. Probably the best case scenario is to see it like Robert Johnson, Slim Harpo, uh, Lonnie Johnson, Blind Willie Johnson, that kind of stuff, where it's going to sound like it's from a particular time and may not be immediately feel relevant to people in the year 2050 or 2080 or whatever. But uh, there's, I mean, there's plenty of people that love Robert Johnson today,
Hmm.
um, and I do. Uh, there's that music is still you can still go and find people playing that music authentically today, and so I hope that that's still the case 50, 60, 100, 200 years from now, where it's seen in that light that, yeah, it's not going to be. I wish it would still be the music the kids are listening to, but I doubt it. But I hope it still is part of the conversation in the way that the original blues artists and the original country artists are in the conversation
Who do you think
today.
sticks around? Like,
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't know. Now, I do think very few acts, and the Beatles are one of them, that will be in like that Beethoven category, um, where again most kids don't listen to classical music, but it's it's taught and appreciated with a level of respect.
yeah, I think the Beatles are going to be, if only one like musical act like survives from this generation. I think the Beatles will be like the one that like is definitely talked about. I mean, even to just like their popularity at the time, their impact, and the general quality of which it still holds up. Um, like a song like "Yesterday" kind of is timeless with its instrumentation and recording. Where it's just it's simple strings and guitar, and it's recorded very cleanly, so it's not necessarily indicative too much of a certain era. And with remasters, it can sound very contemporary. So I think the Beatles definitely stick around. And then I think you get maybe like one or two others. You might get Prince as being remembered as just like an absolute genius. And then maybe you'd get like Springsteen remembered as like the great poet. And then Dylan gets forgotten because his vocal sucks.
I think you're giving Dylan a bit of a short shrift there, but yeah, yeah,
I mean, I
it's
like
tough
Dylan
to say.
vocals, but like I think that in terms of like maybe because Springsteen had like that more mainstream longevity, and also has that whole like working class vibe, and the fact they had Bruce Springsteen in books when I was in elementary school, so that's one reason why I think he sticks around.
Yeah, yeah, he's certainly there's potential there for Springsteen to be one. I think Dylan is absolutely one. Queen could be one. Uh,
I think the fact
Prince
that you will
Prince
have,
could be.
I know you don't like sports, but the fact that "We Will Rock You" and "We Are the Champions" are just sport anthems,
Hmm.
um, and like every generation discovers the song Bohemian Rhapsody at one point, so I think Queen would be one.
Yeah, they could be. Kind of the way I think of it is because I don't do sports, but if you think about history, if you think about U.S. presidents, and you think about the founding fathers, right? Washington, Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, you know, that crowd.
Hmm.
Um, they are. I don't think any kids today really relate to them. Maybe because of Hamilton, that brought a lot of attention
Did you like
back.
Hamilton?
For I did. It took me a little while to get into it, um, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it
About
won. It won me
15,
over. I did have
about,
to watch it with
about,
subs though, like a
about
chump.
15 minutes into it, I was like, okay, I get it. I get it. And I loved it. But it was, it didn't immediately grab me for the first 10 minutes. I was like, "Hmm, it's good, but I'm not sure I get what all the fuss was about."
And
But
then
yeah,
once you get locked in, you're like, okay, yeah, I get it.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But anyway, so that kind of brought it to a new generation, that some of that history. But for the most part, I don't know the kids were, but kids do know, I would imagine most kids at some point in their
They learn about
life,
George Washington and Benjamin
they've
Franklin.
learned, right, they've learned about the founding fathers. Um, it's all those presidents in the middle that, you know, Buchanan and
Ah, what
uh,
trash.
and
I'm also a history nerd, so like you
Franklin
mentioned
Pierce, and
also yeah, he wasn't that
he was a
great.
terrible president. He's
Yeah,
the one president from my home state of New Hampshire. He was a terrible president.
yeah, he wasn't good.
Um, Taft, all those guys. Like
I
nobody remembers
Taft is
them.
underrated. Taft is underrated.
Well, sure, there's a lot of bands you can say that are underrated, but I'm
Right.
saying, but they're not going to be remembered the way the founding fathers are remembered. And so,
Well,
so you're
I
going to have
think the
some
Rolling Stones are
bands.
going to be the William Howard Taft to the Beatles that are Theodore Roosevelt's.
Yeah, it's. I think that's what you'll have. The Beatles, because they are like the George Washington, right? They are, in so many ways, the first, and what they did, it can never be done again because circumstances are just different. It's nothing against. There could be an artist that comes out today that's every bit as great and innovative as the Beatles were, but it would not happen in the same way because it cannot happen in the same way because the world is just in a different place
Hmm.
from culture and technology and just everything. You just don't. It's just not set up uh, the way it was for the Beatles in 1964. But so I do think they will be remembered the way, like, and revered the way somebody like George Washington or Thomas Jefferson is. Um, but that's a rarity. I think most bands will be lucky to be kind of a niche piece of history,
Yeah,
the
like I
way
feel like the
the
Eagles
way
are
the
going to
blues artists.
disappear. I feel like they're going to be like snap of the finger 100 years like they're going to be some like super hardcore music nerds who are into the Eagles, but I feel like that's one that's going to be like and I'd love to be wrong, just so I can have someone 100 years from now dig up this podcast for whatever reason, be like, that guy was so full of shit. Eagles are the biggest band of all time, fool.
Well, they're one of the biggest selling acts of all time, and they still sell a ton of copies of that greatest hits record. So who knows? But
Yeah.
they don't feel, and I like the Eagles. I
But
know it's
it feels like more of
very
a
fashionable
generational
to
thing.
hate on the Eagles. It's hugely fashionable to hate on the Eagles, and I do not hate on the Eagles. But they don't feel to me like a band that has that kind of sticking power to be around in 100 years. Certainly not the way the Beatles or the Stones are.
I don't know if
Um,
the Stones would have that sticking power. I I that's one where I feel like they did well as the rivals to the Beatles, and then just like the sheer force of willpower of sticking around as a band and putting out like solid music and never losing that fan base. But I think in terms of like the lens of history, I don't think their material can stand up to the material of the Beatles. And so I think they're going to be remembered more, 100 years from now for their relationship to the Beatles than their necessarily their own legacy.
Maybe, I don't know. I think they're more important than that. Personally, I think their best music was all made after the Beatles.
I mean, I agree with that also. I don't disagree with that statement, but I feel like the Stones are they feel like a bit more of a generational band than a cross generational band, if that makes sense. Like the people who I know are really into the Stones are pretty much just boomers, versus the Beatles. I notice like across generations are into, and this is obviously personal anecdote. And I don't have hard numbers, but like Prince is another one of those artists who is like across generations, and the Stones, it's like boomers and weird classic rock fans like myself. but that's like it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yep. Um, could be. Could be. I mean, they're a band that was hugely influential on acts like the New York Dolls, which were then hugely influential on punk bands that came and everything after that. So they are in their way. They may be a lesser founding father, but I do think they hold a spot as the use that
They'll be like
analogy
the
as
James Madison. We're just like, oh yeah, that guy,
yeah, they were there.
that
They signed the
guy.
Declaration of
He
Independence.
was
They may have
there,
not had the biggest signature, but they were signers of the original
right?
Declaration of Independence. If you want to
What's up, John Jay?
squeeze every bit out of this metaphor, but
Uh, what Todd Rundgren is the Samuel Adams.
mm, Todd. Todd. How do we classify Todd? He's more of like mm, more of like a mad
You know,
scientist than
maybe here's what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you I'm going to give you John Quincy Adams for Todd.
yeah, I can kind of see that.
So in the sense that like John Quincy Adams had like a bunch of really awesome ideas, and then just Congress like cockblocked him from making America actually awesome. And they're just like, no, those are too good. We want the country to suck. And so like, and he's often sort of like, a footnote in history in a number of ways. And that's the same way with Todd Rundgren is sort of like the mad genius with all these great ideas. And he's going to be remembered as bang on the drum all day and guy who produced Bat Out of Hell.
Right.
And so, like, when you
Yeah.
dig into him, you'll like love his stuff. So maybe like an Oscar Wilde figure getting off presidents and just into like eccentric artists that people are into. So I can see like the more eccentric like personalities people gravitating towards. Like I think 100 years
Sure.
from now, people will think that Zappa is the shit. Like there's still going to be that same number of people who think Zappa is the shit 100 years from now as today.
Mhm.
I fully believe like those cults of personality will continue.
That's probably true. That's probably true. Um, yeah, Todd. Well, Todd is one of those guys that often has been his own worst enemy, in terms of success, large commercial success. But uh, yeah, I mean, I'm a huge Todd fan. For me, it goes Beatles number one, Todd number two, um, and then after that, I could argue with myself, but those are always my top two all-time favorite bands or artists. But he's generally viewed by people as being sort of eccentric, a little weird, a little off the beaten path. Even though I think he's written some of the most beautiful songs, some of the most total poppy, should have been huge hit, catchy songs. So I don't. Some of his music is incredibly esoteric, but I find a lot of it is just
Very
I mean,
accessible.
pop stuff. Yeah, yeah. And in an alternate reality, he would have been as huge as any pop star has ever been. But he also, see, like I said, he stepped on his foot a lot of times, and sometimes it was just too far ahead of the curve.
And I think there's something about like pop craft that's maybe like too good, where it's just like it hits the mark for like a music appreciator. But like that's where power pop comes in, where it's like it's not doing anything fancy, but it's just you're savoring those good hooks. And so in some ways, that's where some of his stuff sort of falls in for me, where it's just like here's just like a really finely crafted pop song, which you almost need to be an appreciator of pop craft to enjoy, as opposed to just the general listener, where like a general listener would like enjoy it and bop to it, but maybe it's not like that same. Trying to think, like like I Saw the Light. Um, it's like it's just a fantastic, perfect pop song,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not necessarily. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like why there's like a thing where like we love the power pop and it's like undeniably catchy, but maybe it's almost too intellectual. Like some of the pop craft.
Yeah, well, so a couple of things. There's a song on his third album, Something Anything, which is probably his most successful record. There's a song on there called Couldn't I Just Tell You that
I love that song.
many
Fantastic.
people point to that song as being the birth of power pop as we know it. You can always, there's never any one thing, but that's in the stew of
Hmm.
foundational music that created power pop. Uh, that particular song, and that album is full of just great pop melodies. Uh, and that was his third record. And after that record, he realized that basically every song I've written has been about this one girl that broke my heart. This, the one big teenage breakup or
Living that
whatever.
Jimmy Webb life.
Yeah, and he just felt like that, there's got to be more than this. And and we talked before about how the power pop is always about, girls and love and that kind of thing. And he could have kept down that path, but he felt like he was just writing the same song over and over again, and it stopped being rewarding to him. And that's when he started to go off on a lot more exploratory, all in every direction. He did prog rock for a while. He did these kind of pastiches of just kind of psychedelic stuff. It's everything. He just threw the doors wide open and did a little bit of everything after that, which definitely got him into more of a kind of a too intellectual for the average person, because he was writing about things that were not uh, teenage romance songs anymore. Um, and some of it got too weird for the average listener. And but so it kept him from being a pop star, but he self-sabotaged himself literally at the height of his success. But it also endeared him to tons of hardcore fans like me that I probably would not be as big a fan if he had not delved deeper.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Like
you
he
know,
he would he wouldn't
so
be as interesting. He would just be
right,
just another.
he
He
his
he'd be a
his fan
Tom
base
Petty.
would be the old cliche, right? Is uh, an inch deep and a mile wide,
Yeah.
right? There wouldn't be there'd be a million people, but he would just be one of a million artists that they like, and he wouldn't have that deep of a fan base. And he's the opposite. His fan base is narrow, but they're incredibly loyal. And there's enough of us out here over the years, even today, that he still makes a living off of touring and making new music, and being bought by just enough people to support it. And I'm more than happy to support an artist that I love like that. But yeah, I mean, in a way, I'm always bummed that more people don't. The songs that people know by him are "Hello, It's Me," which is literally the very first song he ever wrote. Imagine 60 years into your career and your people are still asking you to play the very first song that you ever wrote.
I would
Imagine
feel
how
like,
sick of
man,
you.
nailed it first try.
Yeah, quit while you're ahead, right? People know that song, and they know "Bang on the Drum," which is just a stupid song, which was written to be a stupid song. But I don't think he ever expected it to be a calling card.
Can We Still Be Friends was a pretty.
"Can We Still Be Friends" is probably the next most famous song of
Because
his,
I know
and
a
there's
number of
heat
people who
in
would
that
tell me
song.
like, "Oh, Todd Rundgren, Can We Still Be Friends?" Like they would like specifically say that
Yeah.
song. So
Yeah, people know, but it's not as big as the other songs. But those are probably maybe "I Saw the Light." Some people know that song, but for the most part, that's what people know of him is not his best work.
yeah, I mean they don't know Lockjaw, which is really unfortunate because that is the magnum opus of his career.
That's an amazing record.
Oh yeah, I love that. That's actually
Uh,
my favorite Todd Rundgren record because I'm a weirdo. But also, I mean, isn't that appropriate that my favorite Todd Rundgren album is that one?
it's it is one of the most innovative records made in the entire decade of the 1980s. For it's called a cappella. For people that don't know, record is called a cappella, and there are technically no instruments on it, but it's not like any a cappella record you've ever heard. There was at the time, a brand new synthesizer device called the Fairlight. It's one of the very first devices where you could program in samples and then play the samples back and play them in different keys. So he just recorded his voice and treated it and distorted it and twisted it and cut it into bits and put it into the Fairlight. And so every sound you hear on that record that sounds like a guitar or a bass, it's not a guitar or a
Or a
bass, it's
drum?
all his voice. Drums are just his voice and him hand claps and foot stomps and things like that.
Yeah,
So
it's a great record, and
yeah, when you
it's
think of a cappella, you think of like Bobby McFerrin records or the Pentatonics.
hmm
It's not anything like that. It is one of the most innovative uses of the human voice that you will ever hear, and every song on it is different. Again, one thing I love is when a record has every song is different. Almost every song is a different genre on that record.
yep.
Um, it's a masterpiece, and it's a shame that that wasn't a huge record. There's a song on there called "Something to Fall Back On"
hmm
that is in a better world that would have been a number one smash. It is so infectious. It is so catchy. It's amazing. And then when you got the story behind it, that wait a minute, that's all just one guy's voice. I don't understand why some things don't get to be hits. That's I I could never be an A&R guy or one of those people that picks hits because I usually like Bruce Springsteen's "Born to Run." There's one song on there that I thought, well, that's going to be the hit. It was like the one song that wasn't released as a single. So what do I know?
What was the
But
song you thought would be the hit?
I don't remember, but it was not a
What,
hit.
Meeting Across the River?
No, it's on not on "Born to Run" and on "Born in the USA." I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just trying to think of like what would be the worst choice for a single off that, and so that's what I was thinking.
No, it was some song on "Born in the USA" that I wasn't crazy about the record, but there was one song that I thought, oh, that I bet that's going to be a big hit, and it was one they never released it as a single. I don't think I don't remember what it
Yeah,
was,
it's one
but
of my lower ranked Springsteen albums. Um, but I do want to ask you about three Rundgren things specifically, and then
shoot.
probably a good point to sign off. So, opinions on two different records and one song. So, opinion on the New Cars record, opinion on Arena, and opinion on the song "Love and Use a Dirty Job," but parentheses, but somebody's got to do it, end parentheses.
Uh,
Take them in any
that
order you'd like.
uh, that's one of the better Steinman Meatloaf songs, I think.
Well, because Todd's singing.
I just genuinely like that song. That would be the one that I would probably pick if I had to pick a favorite Steinman / Meatloaf song would be that one. So yeah. Um what was the first one?
The New Cars and
The
also
New
Arena. Basically,
Cars.
like albums that I haven't actually heard a Todd Rundgren fan talk about. So I just want to get your take on those records.
Yeah, the New Cars, that was interesting. So it was it's the band is half of uh basically half of even more than that. It's like two guys from the Cars and three guys, including Todd from Utopia or Todd Projects. It was the guitar player and keyboard player from the Cars. Prairie Prince from the Tubes played drums, and he also done a ton of work with Todd. Kazim Sultan on bass, who was in Utopia and is a frequent Todd collaborator, Todd himself. Well, it was an interesting idea. Uh, Very strange. Again, I don't know where some of these ideas come from. I would have preferred they just went into the studio and made a record of all new material. But instead, they released this live album of them playing Cars songs, covers, with like two originals on the record. if I remember correctly. So it's okay, but as a Todd fan, I don't really have a desire to hear him sing Cars songs. And I like the Cars. I did an episode of my podcast on a Cars track. And being from the Boston area, they were huge here. So I love them, but I would have rather heard something new, something fresh. And the fact that it's a live album, the whole thing felt half-assed to me, frankly. And then they went on the road, and they had a bus accident, and Elliot Easton, the guitar player, broke his shoulder blade and couldn't play. And so they had to cancel the rest of the tour. And that killed the whole project, and it never got past that initial album. So it's just a weird detour, one of many weird detours in Todd's career. But it's his career is littered with these things that could have been big, could potentially. I could see how a new version of the Cars could have potentially been very successful, but I don't know how that could have ever worked with a live album that's basically a Cars cover band. It just seems weird to me. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it would not be on the list of things that I would give someone if they were saying, how do I get into Todd?
Check out the new Cars album.
Right, right. Of the 10 albums I would give them to listen to, that would not be one of them.
Would Arena be one of them?
Now, Arena is interesting. Arena was Todd's, this was in the late 90s or early 2000s, if I remember correctly. It was kind of him after having done a bunch of records by himself that were very keyboard oriented, of kind of doing an album full of arena rock style anthems, hence the name Arena. And every song on the album is a one-word title. Like, I can't remember off the top of my head now, but Courage, things like that. It was, music that was designed to be played loud in front of a big audience and everybody singing along to in that arena rock fashion. The songs are really good. The problem is it was still basically recorded all by himself on his laptop. And it sounds like a record that was recorded on his laptop, which is fine if you're doing a techno kind of thing like his previous records were.
But if you're doing arena rock.
If you're doing arena rock, yeah, like you get the band together and record a lot of tracks live and get that. It does not have that feeling. There's a sterility to it that's just unfortunate because it could have been great. It's a good record, but it could have been a great record if it actually had been a band. But he kind of did it. He's at this point now, I think, where he just does it all himself. I just want to do it all myself. I don't even bothered.
I get that. Working with other people sucks.
Yeah, it's hard. And when you've got the vision in your head, then you have to try to explain it to other people, and you got to pay them and all of that. So it's just easier to get out the laptop and your Line 6 modeler and record all your guitar parts and do it, which is fine, but it does not capture what the album is supposed to be, which is huge,
bombast,
hysteria era, Def Leppard type of bigness, and that those kind of huge choruses and stuff, and it's just not there, and it's unfortunate. But I like the songs, and I've heard him do a lot of those songs live, and they work. But it feels kind of sterile, like a record made on a laptop when you listen to it, and that's too bad. But I would still encourage people to listen to that one.
All right. Well, we've done 2 hours and 20 minutes, so I think it's a good point for plugs. So, buddy, tell everyone where they can find you, even though I'll just link it in the description. But if you tell them, the YouTube psychology says they're more likely to actually click.
Well, first, let me promote something else. I mentioned earlier that book, and I'm going to say it again because this was a hugely important book to me. It's called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. It's by an author named Susan Cain, and seek it out. Get the audio book if you don't like to read. But if you have, again, any introverts in your life or you are one, it's revelatory.
Who are these
Get that.
introverts that don't like to read?
I don't know, but at any rate, my show is called the I'm in Love with That Song podcast. It's available anywhere you can find great or even mediocre podcasts. I'm part of the Pantheon Podcast Network, so you can find me on their stream, but you can, I'm on Spotify, I'm on Stitcher, I believe I'm on Pandora, basically anywhere you can find the show. I'm in love with that song. If you want to get in touch with me, Facebook is the easiest way to do it. Just look for the I'm in love with that song podcast on Facebook. And the website is lovethatsongpodcast.com. All episodes are available there as well.
Yeah, and if you message Brad's page on Facebook, be sure to make sure it's all small talk, like about how the weather is wherever you are, because
Yeah,
he's
make
really
sure you
interested.
ask me about sports.
All right, well, that is the episode. Bye, Internet.